Hello and welcome to our April Spotlight webinar with Syxsense. Today, we have our industry expert, Graham Brooks, here to give us an inside look into how Syxsense can help eliminate all of those red lines with real-time alerting, immediate device quarantining, automated remediation, and compliance reporting. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat and Graham will reach out after to answer those. And with that, Graham Brooks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe. What we're going to go through today is a couple examples using our real-time monitoring, alerting, and management engine to just show you how you can leverage our platform to perform any kind of action you want. The first thing we're going to look at, though, is how our product is organized, how it's architected, and then how you can use that architecture to do vulnerability assessments on your devices. So how is it managed? Our platform, it's a cloud-hosted tool set. We live in Azure. It doesn't really matter where your devices are stored, if they're on-prem or if you use hybrid or cloud. Our assets, everything that we store around your devices is all in our Azure data centers. In terms of how it's architected, it's all going to be agent managed. So you have an agent installed on each of the devices that you want to use and provision and keep track of using Syxsense. And that will matter in a couple minutes when I show you what it looks like to provision a new asset into the product and how we can then immediately start doing vulnerability management on that device. Last thing to note around architecture is it's all based around the agent talking up to the console and asking for work. What that means is that you don't have to put any massive holes in your firewall. Everything is going to be pull, not push, if you're familiar with that terminology. So your devices essentially are islands in of themselves, getting work from the console, nothing bidirectional or push directional from the console. So it makes it much easier to manage our product. Don't need to set up any special proxies, don't need to configure any appliances on your domain or network. Everything is all just based on that agent. Because of that agent basis, we can actually do some pretty cool things around management. We're not strictly just a network-based vulnerability scanner. We're actually a lot more than that. You'll see some examples of where that can go today. The first of those examples I want to share is actually how we would create a vulnerability assessment. All your devices need to be calculated on a regular basis to determine what configurations might be out of date, and what patches might be pending. And you can actually see that already on my home screen. I have my patch health here. Half of my devices are healthy, half of my devices are unhealthy. And then I can also see my configuration health as well. I've got a bunch of devices that are healthy, and then I have some high and critical priority content that needs to be resolved from a configuration basis as well. And all of that data is actually getting parsed in real time. So I have events that are occurring on my devices around patch compliance and configuration compliance ongoing, and we're seeing the results of that. In fact, if I go over to my automation engine, Cortex, and look under intelligent endpoint postures, this is a folder I created that has all of the different requirements I put in place for my devices. I can see under my new endpoint inventory, a really simple workflow. These are 3 actions using content from our Syxsense repository to inventory your device. So what software is installed, what user accounts exist, BitLocker enablement. We're looking at general device features. So we're checking all that content, and then we're performing a security scan. So we're looking at this endpoint and asking if you have a firewall enabled. Is your antivirus installed and running correctly? Do you have PUPs, that's potentially unwanted programs, provisioned in your environment on that device that you need to remove? We're looking at all of those non-patch related contents, inventorying all of that, collecting it, and then providing it for your use, as you saw on that homepage where you can see the compliance spectra. And then finally, after we do that security scan, we're then looking at patch content. Do you have any patches that are outstanding on this device? Is Google Chrome or Edge or Adobe Reader out of date? Is there anything that needs to be managed from that basis as well? And if we find anything, we'll report on it. But at this stage, we haven't actually done anything. We've left everything alone, and we're just telling you what we're finding. Now, I actually have some new devices that I just provisioned in my environment today for this session. And so if I go up to current and I select this run one here, you will see that I have some devices that finished a scan, 9 of which are done, and then I have 2 devices that are currently running. And you can actually see them here. I've got this Win0J and then WinCUK right here. Both of those devices are currently evaluating their configuration posture. And then no devices are currently evaluating their patch posture. They've either finished that process already or they're still pending. They're still waiting to do that evaluation. And what I'm going to show you actually is what would happen if I added a new endpoint into this set. So to do that, I'm actually going to jump over to PowerShell real quickly, and I'm just going to hit enter. This is an interface I have on a remote device, and I'm just adding it into the console. And once I've added it into the console, it will then show up as part of this vulnerability assessment, and it will be listed as another endpoint ongoing with its scanning. So our product can in real time tell you about what devices need work as they enter the product. And so if you have a new project where you've got, I don't know, 100, 500 new assets that you're onboarding and you need to understand their vulnerability compliance, all you need to do is pop that agent onto the device, either manually like I just did, or dynamically using group policy or Active Directory integrations or a network scanner. Just pop those devices into the console. They hit this policy, which has been stated to run just one time per device, and it will go through this inventory analysis on those endpoints. So that's kind of a really basic example of what you can do with Syxsense. There's a lot more to the product, though. There's a lot more functionality available. A completely different example. Let's say you've got some end user devices that you want to ensure are compliant against a particularly scary vulnerability. The one I have in mind is potentially unwanted products around Google Chrome. Chrome itself, it's a browser most people use, but there's plugins that you can get for the Chrome browser. Some of them you might actually require for your company. For example, if you guys use Chili Piper, it's a great sales product. They have a plugin that you can install for Google Chrome. We use that at Syxsense. There are plenty of other perfectly acceptable plugins that you want to use. There might be some that are bad, though. It's actually fairly common for malicious browser extensions to either install themselves or prompt you to install them without your knowing. You accidentally hit yes, and now you have malware on your computer that exists in your web browser watching everything you're doing. And that's dangerous. And you need to have a process in place to find those issues and then fix them. And so here we have a vulnerability assessment that's going to review, as part of that new device deployment that we just showed you, all 295 known malicious browser extensions that can be found on Google Chrome. If we find any of them, we will then alert you. You'll see here, instead of 0, it would show like 1, 2, 5 devices that are affected. And then you can do what you want with that information. Personally, I'm going to use our automation engine to resolve that issue. And so I'd go into a resolution workflow here, and I would go through the process of scanning for the vulnerability. I would then send a message to my end user. It'll pop up on their screen saying, hey, you have vulnerabilities in Chrome. We need to fix this now. They hit OK, and then it proceeds to turn off Chrome. After Chrome has been removed from service, the user can't access Google Chrome. We are then going to run through a process. This is something that our content team built. It's pretty darn extensive, and it goes through any of those 295 distinct browser extensions and it strips them out, just removes all of them. After we strip out those browser extensions, we then are going to do another patch scan and deploy it against that same content, just validate it, make sure that there's nothing left that needs to be resolved. So that's the payload, that's the work we're going to run. But I want to actually create a policy that's enforced in real time against that context. So here, we need to note down the name, malicious Chrome extensions installed. I'm going to go over to Cortex again, and we're going to create a new workflow. We're going to build this as a policy. We're going to tell it to run every single day. And so here I'm going to say browser remediations. Spelling is important. So browser, there we go. And I'm going to tell it to do a security scan. And we're going to look for that specific element. So I'm going to go to specific vulnerabilities. I'm going to go to browser extensions, and I'm going to tell it to look for any of those browser extension issues, specifically for Google Chrome. Then, if we find anything, we want to take action on what we found. So I'm going to drag over our security resolve action for if we detect that vulnerability. And then I'm going to briefly just look for it here, malicious Chrome extensions. This is the remediation step. So it's just 2 steps, really simple. You can make complex Cortex workflows if you want. My guiding light for our product is to keep it simple, have lots of different automations in place doing lots of different work, but keep each and every one of those automations as simple as you can, because it's easier to debug if things go wrong if you have simple automation. So keeping it simple, we just have 2 steps here, scan for, and then resolve those Chrome-related browser extension issues. Now, once we have that workflow in place, we need to turn it into an actual policy that works on our devices. So I'm going to go back to my intelligent endpoint environment here, and we're going to look for our Google Chrome extension. Actually, I think it might be located out here. So let's look at browsers and see if we can find that workflow. All right, browser remediations. We're going to publish this as a policy. I'm going to tell it to run on an interval. I'm going to tell it to run every 30 minutes. We're going to select from our list of devices, our customer A environment, and I'm going to tell it to run in all the devices in Office B. So if any devices show up in that list, they will then deploy every 30 minutes, and we're just going to evaluate those devices on an ongoing basis to see if we can find any particular configuration issues affecting those devices. Once my devices show up in the console, which will be about 30 minutes, they're immediately then going to populate and deploy that work. So that's kind of a basic example of some of the work we can do around remediations. One of the other really important things we can accomplish through Syxsense is drastic action in case of a critical event. So you have devices that maybe belong to a user who's left the company, and you need to make sure that their endpoint isn't used and abused in a way that it's not supposed to be. So what I could do is create a new Cortex workflow that restricts access to the device. In fact, I've actually already done that. It's down here in my intelligent endpoint postures, and I believe I call it my quarantine zone. Again, super simple automation. It just has 2 steps: enable quarantine and mark the device as untrusted. And what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to create a policy that runs based off of an action I take. And it's only going to run 1 time per device. What I'm going to do here is select a location from my console, specifically a group here in my operations folder. It's called lockdown. And what I'm going to do is state that any device that gets added to that folder, that lockdown group, is going to have this quarantine zone workflow deployed on it exactly 1 time. So 1 time per device for any endpoint that lives there. I'm going to hit save here. And then if I go over to devices and then select my customers, go into customer A, office B. I can select all these devices, whether they're online like that top endpoint or offline like the other devices. And I can then drag them over to that quarantine location. So let's say you have a change in organization and Office B no longer exists. The devices that are there need to be removed from management. I can just drag all those devices over to the lockdown folder here, select yes, and then that policy now applies. So the next time that any of these devices come online, immediately that policy is going to take action on those devices and remove their access to the network. They'll get a nice little prompt that shows up on their screen telling them, hey, this device has been removed from network access, and we've restricted your ability to do work on this machine. And so those are some pretty essential basic functions of our product: real-time management, organizational control, and auditing. You need to be able to see what we're doing. And you saw that early on when we were showing that workflow for new endpoint scanning and management. But there's another layer deeper that's really important to how we do auditing. That being reporting. You need to be able to have long-term trend analysis. You need to see how your environment's doing over the long haul, not just right here and now. And the easiest way to do that is through a patch risk assessment or a vulnerability risk assessment. These reports show either the patching side or the configuration side so that you can know what your overall risk is. So if you want to see, hey, 1.9 missing patches on average, that's a good ratio to have, or potentially something worse, like maybe 5 or 10 missing patches per device, you'll be able to see that running average either just from today or over a period of months or even years. And you can see that play out here. The total number of devices prior to June through October, you can see that steady increase in assets. And then only in October, you start to see some missing patch content. And you can put policies in place, like we showed today, that will enforce patching. Maybe you have specific contents like critical patches or Google Chrome needs to be updated every single day if there's a patch. You can enforce those policies in real time so that your devices stay consistently up to date without you having to manually intervene ever. That's actually the guiding light of our product, is allowing you to put down the tool. Instead of giving you a better tool to deploy work, we actually want you to not have to do the work at all. We don't want you to have to think about patch management or configuration management. Instead, we want you to just be able to review the work that's been done. And then if you see anything that doesn't look right, like for example, here, I can see that we do have some configuration issues like LDAP authentication not being enabled. You can then go back into the product like I showed you for those Google Chrome extensions, enable that remediation, specify a list of devices, enforce that remediation, and then let the tool do the job for you so that you don't have to. And I hope as a takeaway, you can see that our product is really nimble. It's very simple. You don't have to do a lot of work to configure it. And the end game is that we're going to save you a lot of time. On average, our customers are able to reduce the amount of time they spend on patch compliance and vulnerability compliance by up to 75%. That way, you can address more organizational level issues rather than spending your time churning through specific PowerShell scripts to remediate vulnerabilities. Because as you saw, we do that work for you so that you don't have to. If you have any questions around the content I've shared today, please feel free to leave a message in chat. We'll get back to you as soon as we can, or you're always welcome to reach out to whoever invited you to the session or give us a call or email, and we'll address your question as soon as we can. Thank you so much for your time today, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.